Sage was the very first Mustang that I ever picked up, and his story is the one that sparked all of the inspiration to open Nirvana Mustang Sanctuary. His is the story that I want to share with you all today. When we arrived to Oklahoma to pick up Sage, he was absolutely terrified of people. And as you can see here, he's just running around this pen frantically, crashing into these panels over there. And guys, the worst of it, I didn't even get on video, unfortunately. Though he had been with a trainer at this point for 6 months, he had made absolutely no progress. He was no more comfortable with humans than he was being freshly rounded up. And quite frankly, he was just more terrified than ever before. Sage is from 15-Mile, Wyoming, which is known to be one of the wildest HMAs due to its extremely remote location. The herd is often known to dart off even if they see a person, usually a photographer, there to try and capture the herd, even a mile away or more. They'll bolt and leave and get frightened. So this guy here, he was wild for 12 entire years as a stallion before being rounded up. And then the owner, who actually lived in California at the time, decided she wanted to have him trained. So he came to Oklahoma to a trainer's house to be trained. And after 6 months, here is where he is at, just absolutely terrified. The poor guy. He's skinny, he's got cuts all over him. You can't really see that yet, but overall, it's just not a good situation for Mr. Sage at this point. After a while, we finally did get him loaded, and admittedly, this was my first time loading a wild horse. There's many things that I know now we should have done differently in this scenario. So I just wanted to put that out there. This is not how loading goes. These days we have different practices and tools that we use to ensure this is a much more calm process than it was for Sage. But eventually we did get him loaded, and we were able to make the 6-hour drive back to Texas. And the whole time I was just thinking about how terrified this poor horse was, even just at the sight of us humans. Even here you can see his high head, his wide nostrils. He's breathing very hard. He's just absolutely terrified. When we got him home, I was finally able to assess his poor body condition and determine that getting weight on him was priority number 1. With that in mind, I decided to sit with him for several hours every day just to try and teach him that humans were not out to hurt him. As you can see in this clip, he was completely disinterested and repeatedly shows me the universal signal for please leave me alone, a horse showing you their butt. You can see the abundance of scratches on his face and his legs here, and you can also see his cute little mustache that he develops in the summertime. I decided that patience and showing him love and care would have to be the number 1 most important key aspect to this guy's training. And lo and behold, on day 1, after about an hour and a half, he stretched out and took one tiny nibble of hay out of my hand. A sweet victory that brought so much joy to me. Over the next few weeks, I spent a ton of time just sitting with him, trying to convince him that I wasn't going to harm him in any way or do anything that he wasn't truly comfortable with. It was beautiful when he finally decided to investigate me, starting with just the smallest sniffs of my boots, as I tried to convince him that he could come near me and eat hay. Like most wild horses, he had no idea what any kind of feed or hay pellets were. So my goal was simply to introduce him to those so that we'd be able to use them as a training aid in the new world of positive reinforcement that I was beginning to explore due to Sage's need of a much gentler method of training than the traditional pressure and release or round pinning methods that I was previously taught. He was so frightened that even the small motion of my hand petting his face from a distance scared him to where he felt the need to back away. But on one beautiful overcast day, it happened. Touches in exchange for a handful of hay. I was elated at his relaxed demeanor, his low head, and his willingness to finally allow me to touch him. It was a stark contrast from the horse I had seen the day we had arrived in Oklahoma to pick him up. What a beautiful victory, and what an absolute gift to be offered the trust to touch this once wild stallion who had lived in the Badlands of Wyoming for 12 years. I will forever cherish the afternoons spent sitting with him, listening to birds chirping as he munches on his hay happily. Even though he had allowed me to touch him, he was still extremely reluctant to eat the hay pellets from my hand. You can see the whites of his eyes here as he fights with himself over taking the leap to reach out and take pellets from my hand, or being too scared to do so. So finally, at the end of this session, we had a breakthrough, and he took a little nibble of hay pellets from my hand, and I counted that as a massive win because that meant we could carry on with our training journey. I filmed every single session with Sage, and I shared much of it on social media, quickly gathering a following of nearly 20,000 people on TikTok interested in kind and ethical training methods that would actually help their horses feel safe instead of the fear-based training methods we have all grown up with and been commonly taught. Without Sage and his sensitivity and his need for this empathy and kindness, I never would have ventured into the world that is science-based horse training, where the horse is truly listened to and respected in all of their myriad forms of subtle communication. With the help of positive reinforcement training and really taking into consideration every single one of Sage's stress indicators, facial cues, and tiny bits of body language, he was able to begin to accept touch and even embrace it as something positive. His quiet confidence was beginning to shine through, and the scared, skinny horse that we had seen before was beginning to vanish before our eyes. What a joyous occasion when he began to follow me at liberty, coming over and choosing to engage with me rather than putting his nose in the corner and ignoring my existence. At the time, my horses were boarded at a barn in a nearby neighborhood, and they were technically not allowed to be on the property if they weren't halter broke. So priority number one for Mr. Sage was getting him halter broke at a speed in a way that he was comfortable with. If you push this horse in any way, he would leave. And I took that as a sign that I was doing something wrong and needed to slow down, rethink the approach, and come at it in a manner that allowed him to be an autonomous partner, consenting through every single step of his training journey. Eventually came the time for him to leave his small pen and join my mare in the little 1-acre pasture, and I worried that he would choose to revert back to wild, as I had heard these animals often do, by big-name trainers even. The sight of him out there exploring, experiencing freedom, nibbling on the trees and standing happily in the tall green grass is a moment that I will never ever forget. You could just tell he was returning to his former majestic, beautiful, wild self, even though we had been progressing with his training. And to my absolute elation, our connection was lasting, even though he now had freedom and much more space to choose to leave our sessions if he wanted. During this time, it dawned on me that Sage was blind in his right eye, with cataracts developing in a cloud of white that seemed to be growing over time. How had no one else that had owned him previously realized this, I wondered. Of course he was so terrified. Horses who have compromised vision often have an extremely hard time adjusting to domestic life. We spent lots of time just working on our Connect at Liberty. During this time, I was immersing myself in the world of BLM Mustangs and all of the tribulations that they face, both in the wild and once they are rounded up. I became obsessed. My husband and I closed on our 160-acre property in southwestern Colorado that would be the future home of Nirvana Mustang Sanctuary, and the date was set to move. We would be moving in December of 2021, and the date was fast approaching. With that, I wanted to have Sage nice and comfortable with entering the trailer before we were to make the 16-hour journey up to Colorado with 3 horses: Sage, a rescue off-the-track thoroughbred, and my mare Ruby, whom I'd had since she was a yearling. We practiced loading into the scary little tarp shelter, and then the time came for us to go ahead and try to get him used to the trailer, which took a lot of time. And we fed him in the trailer, just on the edge of it, so he could get used to it. And we worked very hard on loading. And here you can see he had no problems telling me no, but I appreciated that, and I learned that allowing the horse to speak their mind in this way was not something bad and not something that needed to be punished or should be punished. It was a good thing that the horse was comfortable enough to express themselves to us in this way, enough to say, "No thank you, I'm not comfortable." Before we knew it, the day came and we had moved with the help of our family up to Colorado. We had bought raw land, had a house built, ran power and water, and we had our 3 horses in a round pen until we were able to build fencing that first spring. Here they are enjoying the snow for the first time. Sage was a little skeptical after the trailer ride up, but we continued our sessions and continued our focus on connection with one another, and he was magnificent, as always. You could tell he just felt so at home in the arid climate in the mountains of Colorado. I'll never forget the day when the pasture was finished and we could finally let the horses out to run and stretch their legs, and what a glorious sight it was to see Sage, especially Sage, floating across the landscape, looking as if he belonged there and nowhere else. You could feel the palpable waves of his spirit rolling off of his body and across the terrain as he ran, hooves thundering back and forth through the sagebrush, experiencing freedom like he hadn't in many years since he was rounded up from Wyoming. I couldn't wait to offer this to more Mustangs like Sage who found themselves in terrible situations that they truly did not deserve to be in. Now that my horses were not being boarded anywhere, there was no need to push Sage through any further training. He lived his days in absolute peace. As our herd grew, he developed best friends, especially this little bay here, Dietz, whom he to this day loves so much. Our sessions became completely on his terms. We would practice just fun little exercises at liberty whenever he wants, and from there we truly saw him blossom. As the once faraway dream of Nirvana Mustang Sanctuary became a reality, I reflected more and more on my journey with Sage and how he was the true catalyst for this wonderful sanctuary that now 84 Mustangs call home forever. Without this wonderful boy and all that he went through, all that he was able to overcome, we would not be here today. So I thank you, Sage, for this journey, for teaching me so much about listening to the horse and always putting the horse first. To this day, he loves to come up and engage, no longer the scared, frightened soul that he once was after leaving the trainers. He enjoys his face pets. He loves meeting every new member of the herd. And most importantly, he has been restored to his glory, his magnificence from the wild that it never should have been taken from him. He lives life here on his terms, being the horse that he wants to be. And it is such a pleasure to see him romp and play with the other geldings, filling the role that he once had in the wild as the elder male in the group. The strong leader, the wise old man. And even as the years pass and his vision gets worse, we rejoice in the fact that he was able to experience a life of peace and freedom once again, a life on his terms, where yes, now he chooses to interact and enjoy the presence of a little girl.